Good evening, everybody. I've been asked by Rabbi Freundlich to fill his place here tonight because he is leading Marav and he's at the Shiva of Josh Cohn, Zichron Levracha. I can't fill the rabbi's place, not even close, but I can deliver the announcements that he asked me to deliver. So that I will do, and I have them written down so I don't forget any of them. Following tonight's lecture, reminder, Marav in the chapel when we are done. The weekly reminder that on the table on your left are the handouts for tonight's lecture, as well as copies from previous ones. And if you brought your binder, you could put them in. If you didn't bring your binder, next week the rabbi will remind you to bring your binder every week. Coming up next Monday night is a special installment of the lecture series on Sefer HaMakamim and on Hanukkah literature and why it is not incorporated in Tanakh, or why we know so little about it, which should be a pretty interesting lecture next Monday night at 7:45. The night before that is the first night of candle lighting, Sunday night, and we'll have a special candle lighting here, lighting our rocket menorah, linked up via video with the communities around Gaza where those rockets landed and eventually made their way into our menorah. So look out for an email on that and join us that Sunday afternoon. I believe, check, that is it. Excellent. So welcome tonight to the next installment in our Great Jewish Books, a series in memory of Dr. Mark Wainberg, Zichrono Livracha. Tonight we've got a special privilege of hearing from Rabbi Michael Whitman of the Adath Israel, neighbor of ours. We're glad that you're with us, and certainly honored to have you here. The topic of tonight's lecture, Rav Yosef Karo and the Shulchan Aruch. I understand that we have in the room a relative of Rav Yosef Karo. So if you need any family stories towards the end,
can they reveal themselves?
A gentleman sitting over there in Ira Crew's seat might be able to help you out. And with that,
what an honor.
With that, Rabbi, please.
Thank you very much. Judah, thank you.
Oh, sorry. One other one I didn't check. Tonight's lecture is sponsored by Rochelle and Jeffrey Ryan and Michaela and Cyril Weintraub in memory of Rochelle and Cyril's beloved mother, Dolly Weintraub, Zichronah Livracha, the Brusha Bat Nachum HaKohen, whose yahrzeit was observed this week, and the learning should be a merit to her neshama.
First, I want to thank Rabbi Freundlich for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. And I'm also honored to be included with this group of presenters, a very illustrious group. I want to start with a brief biography of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and then I want to dwell on the impact and the significance of his work and his life. So much of what I want to start with is pretty well known and it's pretty well documented, and I don't really want to dwell on that so much. I really want to get to one specific area that I don't think is as well understood, and that's really what I want to focus on. Rabbi Yosef Karo was born in Spain in 1488, and he was 4 years old at the time of the expulsion in 1492, fled with his family. The expulsion from Spain was as cataclysmic to the Jewish people, on a par with the Holocaust and on a par with the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, the first and the second Beis HaMikdash, the Churban. If not in the number of lives taken, but certainly in terms of the shock. How could such a thing happen? The upheaval that it caused within the Jewish world is no less than the upheaval of the Churban or the Holocaust. And it led to a reappraisal of how Jews viewed the world and how they viewed their place in it. And the consequences of this expulsion from Spain reverberated enormously for centuries. And like the Churban and like the Holocaust, it was followed by an era of the greatest growth and creativity and flourishing. Just because we're a week before Hanukkah, just mention a famous Dvar Torah. We say prayer in Shemona Esrei, Al Hanisim, and we thank Hashem for the miracles. Al Hanisim, Al Niflos, and then we say Va'al HaMilchamos, and for the wars. I understand you thank Hashem for the miracles. I understand you thank Hashem for the wonders and the successes. Why thank Hashem for the wars? And Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, among many others, says because things that are very difficult and very challenging, and we don't want them to happen, but they have the ability to evoke tremendous positive responses. And that is certainly true within Jewish history, and Rav Yosef Karo is representative of that. Another one who is representative of that is the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and I know that you're going to be discussing him in a future lecture of this series, and I also am going to be referring to the Arizal a little bit later tonight. So getting back to Rav Yosef Karo, the family moved eastward through Greece, what is now Bulgaria, to Turkey, and finally Rav Yosef Karo moved to Tzfat in the northern part of Israel in 1535. And he lived in Tzfat until his death, 1575, at the age of 87. Rav Yosef Karo's stature was so great and so widespread that there was an effort to grant him smicha. So I want to take a moment to explain this. We have something today that we call smicha, or rabbinic ordination. I have smicha, Rabbi Freundlich has smicha, there are some people here that have smicha. It's not the real thing. Let me explain what I mean. Smicha originally meant that a person had learned the entire Torah from a Rebbe, and the Rebbe decided that this student, this Talmud, was an expert in every area of Torah, and this Rebbe had received smicha from his Rebbe going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So when Pirkei Avos says, Moshe to the Zkenim, to the Nevi'im, etc., to the Anshe Knesset Gdola, etc., that is describing the process of smicha, where a Rebbe who has received the entire Torah, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, then passes it on to their Talmud. That's smicha. That process came to a halt near the end of the Talmudic era because of upheavals within the Jewish world. And once it's gone, it's gone. And the problem is, that is the requirement that is needed, for example, to be a member of a Sanhedrin. And a Sanhedrin is the only group, for example, that has the right to disagree with the decisions of another Sanhedrin. So, for example, any mitzvah d'Rabbanan, any rabbinic law or decree, can only be overturned or changed by an equal or greater Sanhedrin. Well, once there's no more smicha, there's no more Sanhedrin, there's no way to change or innovate any rabbinic decree until Mashiach comes. So once it's lost, it's lost. So once it's lost, it's lost. That's it. And in its stead, we have, I don't want to use the word fake smicha, but pseudo smicha, which is really heter hara. What that means is, person learns a yeshiva, and their Rosh Yeshiva or their Rebbe says, you know what, he knows enough in this area that if you ask him a question in halacha, he's authorized to answer your question. So, for example, if it's a question that relates to the subject of Yora Dea, we would say, Yora, is he allowed to answer questions in the area of Yora Dea? Yes, Yora, he's allowed to answer those questions. That's the kind of smicha that we have today. Yadin, is he qualified to sit as a member of a bezdin to decide a monetary case? Yes, Yadin. So we call that Yadin Yadin. That's a different kind of smicha. But no one has the original type that goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So, how are we ever going to get it back? How will we ever reestablish the Sanhedrin? Well, when Mashiach comes. Mashiach comes, Mashiach will designate Dayanim to be on the Sanhedrin. It's a long wait. So the Rambam says that there's one other way. The Rambam says that if all of the great scholars of Israel would agree that a single individual is deserving of this smicha, they would have the right to grant this smicha, and he would then be able to grant smicha to others and re-establish this process. To get all the scholars of Israel to agree on one person. The closest we ever came in 2,000 years was Rav Yosef Karo. And his name was put forth. And it almost worked. Except for the fact that I told you he was living in Tzfat, northern part of Israel. The rabbis in Yerushalayim objected. Not because of him, because they felt that it was improper to have someone not from Yerushalayim to have this honor, and therefore they objected and it fell apart, and I got to tell you, it's not looking good anytime soon. But Rav Yosef Karo came the closest. It's just a tribute to not only his greatness, but how widespread the awareness of his greatness was. One of the major features of his greatness was that he combined absolute expertise in every area of halacha, of Jewish law, as well as every area of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. And this is something that was quite rare for one individual to have both of those qualities, both of those sides. In most instances, there's a person who has greatness or expertise in one or the other. But to have both combined is very rare. One of the works of Rav Yosef Karo that was published after his death is a work called Magid Meisharim. And it's a work that records the appearances of a malach, an angel, that appeared to Rav Yosef Karo throughout his life. He had an ongoing companion of this malach who would appear to him and tell him all sorts of things. He would answer questions that he had. He would make suggestions about what he should work on. He would tell him what was going to happen to him. Incredible, incredible. I do have to point out that it is not universally recognized that this work, Magid Meisharim, is an authentic work. But it is clear that during his lifetime, it was known about Rav Yosef Karo that he did have this malach who visited him and shared with him insights not only of a halachic nature, but of a Kabbalistic nature as well. Rav Yosef Karo's halachic works are one of the earliest that include Kabbalah as well, including quoting from the Zohar, which is the central textbook of Kabbalah. And that is something that, to the best of my knowledge, did not occur at all before Rav Yosef Karo, and very infrequently afterwards. Let me give you an example. If you look at the first sheet that I gave out, this is not quoted from a work of Rav Yosef Karo, it's from a secondary source. From Toldos HaArizal, and again, I'm going to come back to the connection between Rav Yosef Karo and Arizal in a few minutes. So, they made a decision that Jews would not make a big celebration of Lag BaOmer at the grave of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron. As you know, even today, that's quite a controversial subject. It seems that our master, Rav Yosef Karo, was denigrating, was criticizing the actions that go on there. And he wrote a decision that people should not do this anymore. That night, our master dreamed about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who said to him that a great plague would befall the people because of this decision. It was his wish that they celebrate on the anniversary of his death. The following day, he tore up the decision. It doesn't happen within halachic literature that people come to a halachic conclusion based on a dream they had the night before. It doesn't happen. And so this is something unique about the character and the significance of Rav Yosef Karo, that he incorporated this within his halachic decision making. Now, the Arizal, Rav Yitzhak Luria, arrived in Tzfat in 1569. So there were a number of years of overlap where they both lived together, and their shuls were literally across the way from each other, as you can see when you visit Tzfat. And it's an amazing thing, and here we are 500 years later, and you can go there, and I've been there, and you can sense the atmosphere and the influence of these two amazing people, the greatest halachic authority and the greatest Kabbalistic authority of the last 2,000 years, and they lived as neighbors. They both had many Talmidim, they had shuls. In addition to two of them, living there at the same time was Rosh Shlomo Alkovitz, one of the greatest Jewish poets of all history, who wrote L'Chadodi. And there was this tremendously fruitful interaction between these great scholars who covered such vast areas of Jewish learning, and this created a golden era in Tzfat at that time. Tzfat's fame to this day relates largely to that golden era. So if you look please at the second page, this is one of the most famous pieces about this. The practice that many of us have of staying up on Shavuos night and studying Torah has, if not as its source, but certainly its boost, this story. Now this story is written in a sefer by someone who lived a little bit later in Tzfat, the Shalah, Rav Horowitz, and he writes this story. And it's a story written originally by Rav Shlomo Alkovitz, and he's telling a story about himself and Rav Yosef Karo. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but please take it home, because this is the source of what we do on Shavuos night. So we decided that on the first night of Shavuos, we were going to stay up all night learning Torah. We weren't going to miss a moment. And so we started to learn Chumash, and then Shir Hashirim, and Sefer Rus, with complete concentration. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, we heard a mysterious voice. And we didn't know what it was. No one had the courage to look up to see where it was coming from. And the voice began to speak and said, "Listen, my beloved ones, the holiest, the loveliest of the lovely, peace be to you. May your descendants be happy. You've endeavored to crown me on this night, since my crown," referring to the crown of Hashem, the Shekhinah, "has been rolling in dirt in recent times. Think of the experiences of the Jewish people and what that reflects about Hashem in the expulsion and the terrible persecutions of the Jewish people. You've returned the crown to its rightful place. Be strong. And I, an angelic representative of the Almighty, have been sent to speak to you, to compliment you and encourage you. And had there been more people here," of course, whatever crowd is there, you always want a few more. "Had there been more people, I would have been able to reveal more, but this is as much as Hashem has allowed me to reveal now, and keep learning and don't stop." So, when they heard this, they stood up, they bowed down, it's overwhelming. And they kept learning all night. And they went to immerse in the mikvah. And then they told the other people what you missed because you went to sleep. So can you imagine? You stay up all night at the kollel and a malach appears and tells you what Hashem is saying. So the people that missed, they said, "Well, there's 2 days of Shavuos." So it's interesting, by the way, why there was 2 days of Shavuos in Tzfat in the 1500s. I'll leave that for another time. And they said, "We're going to stay up the second night." And they stayed up the second night, and the Malach came also, and it goes on and goes on. So it's unimaginable to think about the richness of Jewish life in a place where you have the Arizal and Rav Yosef Karo and Rav Shlomo Alkovitz. And of course, it makes sense that a Malach would appear. Of course, Hashem would be so happy with such a thing that he would send a Malach. Okay, so among the major works of Rav Yosef Karo, I mentioned the Makom Yesharim. There's a volume of Shalos and Tshuvos Responsa. There's a work called Beis Yosef, which is a commentary on the Tur. So the Tur was the first code of Jewish law that included only what is applicable Bizman Hazeh, meaning after the Churban. So it doesn't have anything about the Beis Hamikdash, nothing about Eretz Yisrael, just the laws that are relevant to us in exile in Golos. And also, it is the first organization of all of Jewish law that is applicable into 4 volumes. And the 4 volumes are Orach Chayim, which deals with daily life, prayer, blessings, Shabbos, holidays. Even HaEzer, which deals with marriage and divorce. Yoredeya, which deals with ritual subjects, keeping kosher, writing a Sefer Torah, conversion, laws of mourning, etc. And Choshen Mishpat, which deals with civil law, because even after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, even after there's no longer Sanhedrin, but a Bezdin of 3 Dayanim, 3 judges, has the right to adjudicate simple monetary cases. So the laws that refer to that are included in Choshen Mishpat. So the Tur is the one that arranged that order, and Rav Yosef Karo wrote a commentary to the Tur called Beis Yosef. I'm going to come back to that. Then, Rav Yosef Karo wrote a work called Shulchan Aruch. Now, the truth is, I was given the topic to talk about Shulchan Aruch, but what I hope to show you tonight, at least my understanding, is that the Shulchan Aruch is, okay, I'll just say, I hope to show you what I think is its correct place and role within the work of Rav Yosef Karo, which I think is different than the popular view. We'll come back to that. But, nonetheless, a testament to the greatness of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law written by Rav Yosef Karo, is that in the last 500 years, it remains the code of Jewish law for the entire Jewish people. In 500 years, it has not been supplanted by any other work that comes close to its importance, significance, authority, acceptance within the Jewish world. Here we are 500 years later, it is unparalleled. And in the last 500 years, every major halachic work, with maybe possibly one or two exceptions, and we could argue about that, but virtually every major halachic work has been a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch. In our day, just to think most famously, the Mishnah Brura. No separate works, they are commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, and the last major work that I want to mention of Rav Yosef Karo is a work called Kesab Mishnah, which is a commentary to the Rabbi. I'm going to come back to that. Okay. I want to try to describe what I believe is Rav Yosef Karo's greatest accomplishment and most lasting contribution to the Jewish world. And that is, Rav Yosef Karo solved one of the most difficult problems in halachic life, and he did so in a most magnificent manner. And I need to take a few minutes to flesh out this problem to be able to help you see the brilliance of how Rav Yosef Karo solved it. If you ask the following question, I know there's something called Torah Shebiksav, the written law. That's the 5 books of Moses. That's the Chumash. I know where that is. I've got it on my shelf. I know where it is. I also know there's something called Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law. Where do I go to find this oral law? Well, the place you go is to the Gemara, to the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud. Of course, also in that Mishnah and Talmud is all rabbinic law. All of the rabbinic legislation. Hanukkah, Purim, etc. All the commentary and everything else that's in the Talmud. There is no question that the Talmud is the greatest intellectual contribution that the Jewish people has made to the world. Its discussion. There's a great book that was published earlier this year, and I recommend it to you highly. It's not our subject for tonight. It's a book by a young woman named Ilana Kershan, and the title is If All the Seas Were Ink. It's a great book. I recommend it highly. I just want to quote just a couple of lines, and it's not about the subject that she's writing about. But she writes, "The Talmud is not a law code intended to tell Jews how to behave, but a record of rabbinic legal conversations in which many of the questions are left open and unresolved. It is a text for those who are living the questions rather than those who have found the answers." It's the most brilliant description of the Gemara that I've ever seen. The Talmud is not about answers. It's about questions. It's about discussion. Okay. So Gemara is amazing, stimulating. There is nothing in the world like studying Gemara, and if you have not had the privilege to taste the challenge and the beauty and the gratification of studying Talmud, then I urge you to give yourself that opportunity. But, practically speaking, there comes a point where you have to decide, okay, what do I do? What's the halacha? What's the bottom line? And the Gemara is not interested in that. You're not going to find it. You're not going to get it. Because that's not what the Gemara was written for, and that's not the subject matter. The subject matter of the Gemara is about what are the opinions? How do you prove it? What's the reasoning? What questions can we ask about the opinion? What answers might we be able to give? What proofs could we give? Fine. Once we know the different opinions, once we know the questions, once we know the analysis, then it's time to move on. What do you actually do? Which opinion do you actually follow? It's not for here. Sometimes the Gemara will say, after a long discussion, the hilchasa, and the law is so-and-so. For example, the Gemara tells us that any time that there's a machlokas, a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. Okay, halacha is like Beis Hillel, fine. So now I know. Or, for example, the Gemara says, anytime there's a machlokas between Rava and Abaye, the halacha is always like Rava, except for 6 cases. And there's a memory device, Yal Kagam, to remember the 6 cases where the halacha is like Abaye, because Abaye was younger than Rava. So, but besides that, it's always like Rava. Okay, fine. So, if it's Rava and Abaye, I know what to do. It's Shammai and Hillel, I know what to do. But in thousands, hundreds of other people, most of the time, the Gemara does not conclude by saying what the halacha is. So what are you supposed to do? Okay, well, then we have a couple of guidelines to help us figure this out. For example, we have a general principle. There are exceptions to it, but there's a general principle. Anytime you have a machlokas, a dispute between a majority and a minority, you have one voice saying one thing, and the overwhelming consensus of the rabbi saying the other, we follow the majority. Or, there are some stylistic cues in the way Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote the Mishnah. For example, if there's an opinion that is not attributed to any specific scholar, it's called a Stam Mishnah, like just stated, halacha kastam Mishnah, because Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, if he ascribes it to Rabbi Yirmiyah says so-and-so, that implies Rabbi Yirmiyah says that, but everybody else disagrees. But if you just make a blank statement, this is the rule, without attributing it to an individual, well, that implies that the halacha is like that. Okay, fine. Fine, that helps in a few cases. But still, there are many, many cases, perhaps the majority of cases, where the analysis does not lead to any clear conclusion. So you need codification. You need some kind of source or process to figure out, okay, so what should the halacha be, practically speaking? One of the earliest to do this was the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who lived in northern Africa about 1,000 years ago. And what he did is he would quote the Gemara, and then he would say, and the halacha is like so-and-so. And you can find the Rif printed in most editions of the Talmud, in the back. it looks like the Gemara. The page looks like the Gemara, and he quotes the Gemara, quotes the opinions, and he says, and halacha is like so and so. Okay, that's very helpful. I mean, it's his opinion. You have the Rif's opinion. Two drawbacks of the Rif. One is it's not systematic. Because, okay, the Rif says so. Fine. He's a tremendous Talmud Chacham. But he doesn't explain how he got to it. He says, this is the halacha. Okay, that's good for some people, but it's not a systematic approach. That's number one. And number two, it's not organized. Or rather, I would say, it's organized as well as the Gemara is organized. And you know, the line in the Talmud, we refer to our Talmud as the Talmud Bavli, by which we mean the Babylonian Talmud. It was written mostly, the scholars in Bavel in Babylonia. But the rabbis say that it also refers to the fact that it is bilbul, that it is a mishmash. Because, as you know, if you study Talmud, nothing is in any kind of apparent organized order. You have a discussion of Shabbos in Avodah Zarah, you have a discussion of Chulin in Makos, and you can only understand all the subjects once you finish the entire Talmud. Because it's not like the Mishnah, which was organized by subject matter. The Talmud has all kinds of subjects all mixed up together. Talmud Bavli, Mavul Val, it's all mixed up together. So, of course, if that's your code of law, if that's the order you're following, well, it certainly makes it a little bit more difficult to look something up. Okay, that's the Rif. The next important code, certainly the most ambitious, is the Rambam, Maimonides. The Rambam was the first one to write a restatement of all of halacha. Mishnah Torah really means a restatement of the Torah. So he took all of the Gemara, all of the written law, all the oral law, all the rabbinic law. He took everything. He decided what the halacha was, and then he organized it in a structured presentation. Very, very elegantly organized. 14 books, each book divided into subjects, each subject divided into chapters, each chapter divided into paragraphs. Everything is ordered, organized in a way that makes sense. Beautiful, elegant. Revolutionary work. Nothing like it had ever been written. It was also revolutionary in the sense of starting a war, because it was very, very controversial. And people were extremely upset with the Rambam for centuries over what he had done because, well, a couple reasons, but the one I want to mention tonight is because the Rambam does not explain to us how he reached the conclusions that he reached. He just presents it all, and it's very readable, very organized. But if you think to yourself, well, why does he say this halacha? If you look at the Gemara, it would appear that the majority opinion is the other opinion. Why did he write this? And the Rambam doesn't explain it. And people were quite upset about that. So, if you look at the Rambam, and you study it, and you have studied the Gemara before, so a lot of the time, it's clear. Maybe it's a situation where the Gemara said v'hilchasa. Maybe it's something in Machlokas Beisham and Beis Hillel where we know what the halach is. But sometimes, it's very, very difficult to figure out how in the world did the Rambam reach this conclusion. It would appear by looking at the Gemara that the conclusion should be different. And since the writing of the Rambam, 900 years ago, until today, and continuing till tomorrow, and the future, there is an ongoing effort to try to understand how the Rambam arrived at the conclusion that he writes in Mishnah Torah. Let me give you this example. A typical outline of a shiur, of a lecture by, for example, the Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, of blessed memory. So, a typical outline of the shiur would go like this. He'll start by quoting the Rambam on whatever subject it is. And he'll say, well, how in the world does the Rambam get that from the Gemara, which apparently seems to say exactly the opposite? Then, 3 hours later, with a completely new conceptual framework of an understanding of the ideas in the Gemara, he would conclude the shiur with, and that's why the Rambam writes what he wrote. Okay? But that type of analysis is still going on because, as I said, the Rambam doesn't explain it. Rav Yosef Karo wrote such a work, Kesab Mishnah. That's exactly what it is. It's a commentary to the Rambam where he tries to explain, in these cases, how did the Rambam arrive at the conclusions that he arrived at. Okay. That's the Rif, and that's the Rambam. The main contribution of Yosef Karo is that he provided codification. What is the psak halacha that is both systematic and transparent? And he did that in his work called Beis Yosef. And without any question, in my opinion, Beis Yosef is the major work of Rav Yosef Karo and the major contribution that he contributed to the Jewish world. So, I said before, Beis Yosef is ostensibly a commentary to the Torah. The word, by the way, the word Tur means row, and refers to the 4 rows of stones on the Choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And the Tur is the one that came up with the organization of all applicable halacha in the diaspora into 4 volumes: Orach Chaim, Yeridea, Even Ezer, Choshen Mishpat, as I explained before. So he's the one that came up with this organization of all of Jewish law into 4 rows or 4 volumes, and it divided into subjects, subjects into chapters, chapters into paragraphs. Well organized, structurally organized. And so Rav Yosef Karo wrote his work as a commentary to the Torah, to follow the order of the Torah. But in my opinion, the most remarkable thing is the methodology. So if you look please at the last sheet that I handed out. Now I realize it's only in Hebrew. I searched to try to find a translation of this to show to you, but I was not successful in doing that. So if you're not able to follow it, I am going to translate it as I read it. This is Rav Yosef Karo's introduction to this work, Beis Yosef. And in the first part of it, on the right-hand side, he basically goes through the problem that I've described to you, the shortcomings of the Rif and the Rambam. And therefore, he says, on the left-hand side, where I have it underlined, V'ala b'daiti, sha'achar kol ha'dvarim, afsik halacha v'achriya ben asfaros, ki zeu ha'tachlis lios lanu Torah achas u'mishpat echad. I decided that I needed to create, out of all of the opinions and all of the disagreements, a psak, a determination of what the halacha should be. Because there needs to be uniform, accepted, decided psak halacha. A few lines down, where I have it underlined, V'lachein hiskamti, b'daiti. And therefore I decided, Ki liyos shlosha amudei ha'hora, asher habayis beis Yisrael nishan aleihem, b'hora asehem. The three pillars of halacha on which the entire Jewish people relies, Halohema, Harif, Varambam, Vaharosh. The three greatest halakhic authorities before Rav Yosef Karo's time are the Rif, I mentioned to you, the Rambam, I mentioned to you, and the Rosh. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, was actually the father of the Tur, okay? But they're the three greatest. So he says, Amarti alibi, I said to myself, Shebemakom sheshnehem mehem maskimim l'das echos, nifsok halacha kamosa. I'm going to look at what the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh say about any given subject and follow the majority. In any situation where there's a majority of 2 versus 1, I follow the majority. That's it. It sounds so simple, but it's so elegant. It is, and it's so transparent because anybody could do it. Of course, you've got to decide which 3 you're going to rely on. It's got to be an odd number. But it's brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant. And what the Beis Yosef is, this commentary to the Tur, he will, on every paragraph that the Tur writes, the Beis Yosef starts with the Gemara. And he'll quote the Gemara. He'll quote the main opinions in the Gemara, and then he'll quote what the Rif and the Rambam and the Rosh say about the Gemara, and then he'll say, and the halacha is like, and you know exactly why it is. Because it follows the majority of those 3 opinions. That's the Beis Yosef. He was the first person in Jewish history to accomplish this. The first person to write a code that was both systematic and transparent in its methodology. Then he wrote the Shulchan Aruch as an outline. It's like if you take the Beis Yosef and you only look at the last line of each lengthy passage and you put it together, that's the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is like a memory guide. It's like a you don't have Cliff Notes here, right? There's something else. It's like a crib sheet. It's like a to cheat on an exam. You take the last line of every paragraph and you write it down. That's the Shulchan Aruch. Rav Yosef Karo would be horrified. He would turn over in his grave at the thought of somebody taking a Shulchan Aruch and opening it up and learning from that. It doesn't make any sense. You can't learn halacha like that. Unless you start with the Beis Yosef, and of course you can't start with the Beis Yosef, you have to start with the Gemara. And that is the reason that you cannot paskin a shaila, you cannot decide an issue in Jewish law by opening up the Shulchan Aruch. And anyone who decides a halacha by opening up the Shulchan Aruch, that's not the person you need to go to. Yes, of course, yes. If you have a question like, I forgot to say Yalav V'Yavo, what am I supposed to do? You can open the Shulchan Aruch, you can remind yourself what the halacha is. But any kind of a shaila, any kind of a question with any complexity that requires any kind of thinking and comparing, you can't start with the Shulchan Aruch. You've got to start at least with the Beis Yosef, so that you understand what the opinions are and what the reasoning is. And then you can decide, well, how would you apply it to this case? And what is relevant, what is applicable? However, the significance of the Shulchan Aruch is that it's the conclusions reached in the Beis Yosef. And as I said, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, remains the most authoritative code in all of Jewish history, more than any other before or since. And since that time, 500 years, the most significant halachic works in the last 500 years have all been nosei kelim, which means commentaries. The word nosei kelim means like weapon bearer, like the guys that are they're carrying the weapons of the real soldier. Now, the supreme stature of the Shulchan Aruch is due to the stature of Yosef Karo, how widespread his acceptance and authority was, his organization, his methodology. But it's also due, Rabbi Freundlich, what time did you say that they're going to bring a hook and carry me off?
9 o'clock to a minute.
9 o'clock. Okay, I'm going to try to do that. Okay, thank you. It's very intimidating with this hook, Rabbi. The overwhelming stature of the Shulchan Aruch is due to one more factor that is external to Rav Yosef Karo, and I'd like to share it with you. It'll just take a few minutes. So there is one shortcoming to the methodology of Rav Yosef Karo that I described before. Does anyone here have an idea of what that shortcoming is? Yes?
I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it seems to me he's a Sephardic rabbi, and then you have German Jews, Franco Jews, Polish Jews, and it seems to me that this focuses on the Sephardic...
You are absolutely correct. 1,000% correct, but let me just sharpen what you said. Rav Yosef Karo said, here's what I'm going to do. 3 greatest, Rif, Rambam, and the Rosh. There's an imbalance there. The Rif is Sephardic. The Rambam is Sephardic. The Rosh, one of the most interesting characters in Jewish history. Leaders, scholars. The Rosh was from Europe. He was born in Ashkenaz, but he moved later in life to Spain. One of the very few people that did that. There was very little movement between one to the other in that era. So at best you have 2 Sephardim and 1 Ashkenaz or 1 half Ashkenaz. So the balance is in favor of Sepharad. And it did not reflect completely the practices and certainly the customs of Ashkenaz. So Rav Moshe Isserles, known as the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, was a contemporary. He lived in Krakow, Poland. His stature was so great, Rav Yosef Karo used to send questions to Rav Moshe Isserles to ask him questions. And Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, recognized the need for a code that reflected Ashkenaz halakhic authorities and Ashkenaz customs. And the truth is, he could have very well written his own code in whatever style he would have chosen. He was eminently qualified as Rav Yosef Karo. And had he done that, we would have ended up with 2 codes. A code for Sephardim and a code for Ashkenazim. But the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, was a tremendous anav. He was a tremendously humble person. And therefore, he decided that he was going to write his code in the form of notes, hagahos, notes, to the Shulchan Aruch. And as instead of writing a separate work, he wrote like addendum, like with an asterisk. And in any place where the Shulchan Aruch writes a certain halacha, if the Ramah feels that the halacha for Ashkenazim should be different, he writes a note, Hagah. But we do it this way. He called his work Hamapa, which literally means the tablecloth, to complete the metaphor that the Shulchan Aruch is the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. So Rav Yosef Karo was saying that with my work, it's a complete code. The table is set. Well, if the table is set, the only thing that's missing is the tablecloth on top. So the Ramah added the tablecloth on top, and now it's really a complete work. The result is that we have one code, one work, authoritative to all Jews until today. Now, when the Ramah adds a note, then Sephardim will follow what Rav Yosef Karo says, and we refer to him as the Machaber, the author, because he wrote the work, and the Ashkenazim will follow the note, the Hagah of the Ramah, of Rav Moshe Islis. And it was with that decision that the centrality of the Shulchan Aruch was assured and remains so till our day. Because by having both the work of Rav Yosef Karo as the author and then the addenda of the Ramah to reflect Ashkenaz practice, that meant that all Jews were using the same work. In some paragraphs, some Jews would follow one opinion, and the other Jews would follow the other opinion within the paragraph, but all Jews remained loyal to that single work. And that was assured by the way in which the Ramah added his Ashkenazic practice. So that's Rav Yosef Karo, known best for authoring the Shulchan Aruch, but in terms of the significance of what he achieved, in my opinion, most importantly, wrote the Beis Yosef to provide us with a systematic and transparent methodology for all Jewish law in our time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Plenty of time.
Do we have questions?
If anyone has any questions, I see you.
Yes, yes, sir.
There is a legend that the Rabbi also wrote the halachot, all of them. Once he found Rav Yosef Karo, procedurally, he actually put it in the Gniza. And only later on, he put him apart.
I've heard that story. I was not able to verify it, so I didn't include it, but it would not surprise me if that was the case. But he was a tremendous honor. As Rav Yosef Karo was a tremendous honor in writing his Beis Yosef as the commentary to the Torah. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I don't want anyone to think, God forbid, that I'm denigrating the Torah, but any serious student of halacha has got to study Beis Yosef. So you have to buy a copy of the Torah to get it, because that's the only place that it is. If you have a Torah, you're using it for the Beis Yosef, not for the Torah. But, I mean, so they shared that quality, but he certainly had it. Yes, Ricky?
You said that Yosef Karo wrote a book explaining how the Rambam arrived at...
And it's printed in every traditional edition of Mishnah Torah. It's called Kesab Mishnah. It is a subject that has occupied and continues to occupy the greatest Jewish minds over the last 900 years. So what you do is you look at the Gemara and you think to yourself, how could I understand the Gemara differently to lead me to the conclusion that the Rambam led? And by the way, and one of the, it's not the right term to use, the Hail Mary solution, if you can't figure it out, it is, the Rambam was relying on the Talmud Yerushalmi, not the Babylonian. So you'll see that answer given sometimes. Maybe sometimes it's accurate, but sometimes it's just like the Hail Mary. We have no idea. And maybe there's Yerushalmi somewhere. Maybe there's some other version. That's another one. Maybe the Rambam had another version of the Talmud, a different text than we have. That you know that you're grasping for straws when you come up with those answers. But that's how you would do it. And thousands of the greatest scholars up until our day and continuing try to do that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appropriate that Rabbi Whitman taught the Shulchan Aruch, which is all about the clarity and the organization, and we got a tremendous clarity and organizational skill in terms of presenting tonight's class. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let me just take a quick moment to again thank tonight's lecture sponsor Rochelle and Jeffrey Ryan and Michaela and Cyril Weintraub in memory of their mother Dali Weintraub, Devrusha Bas Nocham HaKohen. And invite you all. Next week will be Hanukkah. Well, I'll be presenting next week. Will be a special Great Jewish Books Hanukkah class on the book of the Maccabees and why it was not included in the great books of Tanakh, yet what it has to teach us about Hanukkah. So we'll be speaking about that next week. Special Hanukkah class, 7:45. Look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you again, Rabbi Whitman. Maariv, 9 o'clock in the right now in the shul. Thank you.